You want answers?
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
You want answers?
You have offended my family.
I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth!
And you have offended the Shaolin Temple.
You can't handle the truth!
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Radical Rant.
Illinois Governor Pat Quinn finally got around to signing the medical marijuana bill to make the state of Illinois the 20th state to provide some measure of protection for seriously ill people who choose to use cannabis. Well, some people who are seriously ill. While the standard cancer, HIV/AIDS, and glaucoma conditions are covered in Illinois, as they are in almost every other medical marijuana state, Vermont doesn't cover glaucoma, believe it or not, you're not going to find the catch-all severe pain or severe nausea in the Illinois law. If you're a patient in pain, it had better be complex regional pain syndromes type 1 or complex regional pain syndromes type 2. No mere migraines or chronic back pain are going to qualify. Simply protecting spastic disorders won't happen. You'd better specifically have multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, or Tourette's. If you've found that cannabis alleviates your seizure disorder, I guess you're out of luck, since none of them, including epilepsy, appear to be on the Illinois list. And if your illness is mental, such as a returning soldier or a rape victim, which unfortunately is becoming too redundant, if you're returning with post-traumatic stress disorder, your use of cannabis still earns you arrest and a jail cell in Illinois. Why all the restrictions? To prevent healthy people from using cannabis. Folks with migraines, chronic pain, epilepsy, PTSD, and such must risk imprisonment for using medical marijuana because in other medical marijuana states, there are too many patients using medical marijuana. Only with cannabis do we consider the number of patients achieving positive results with a drug treatment to be a total in need of limiting. Nobody ever stops to ask whether 26 million Americans using Lipitor is too many. See, in California, where medical marijuana started, a doctor can recommend medical marijuana to a patient for any other illness for which marijuana provides relief. Imagine doctors free to make medical decisions considering only their patient. Well, but that led to sign-twirling bikini girls hawking medical marijuana recommendations on Venice Beach for healthy young skateboarders with anxiety. So the next states came up with a list of conditions that were eligible for medical cannabis treatment, taking the discretion away from doctors and codifying it into law. Only with cannabis are doctors mandated to use a medicine only for specific conditions. Did you know 1 out of 5 prescriptions written today is for so-called off-label use? That's where a doctor gives you a drug for your condition that is FDA approved for a different condition. For example, beta blockers that the FDA approved for high blood pressure are often prescribed to alleviate migraine headaches. Yet still, some healthy people manage to get their hands on medical marijuana, or so the naysayers believed. In Oregon, law enforcement railed against the ever-rising total of registered patients, 10,000, 20,000, 40,000. And at each reporting of statistics, they would claim the thousands registered must be indicative of abuse of medical marijuana. Why, look at all the people registered for chronic pain. Never mind the fact that 26% of Americans report chronic pain that has lasted longer than 24 hours, and 42% of them say that's been the case for longer than a year. So the latest medical marijuana states, Illinois being the exemplar, have whittled down and redefined their qualifying condition list to make sure patients can't get a card with some vaguely defined syndrome. However, that's not the only way in which Illinois has the strictest medical marijuana law. Illinois is now the 9th medical marijuana state in a row to forbid a patient from cultivating his or her own cannabis plants. This, too, stems from what are perceived to be abuses in Western medical marijuana states. California famously allows doctors to recommend any number of plants and any amount of possessed cannabis their patient requires, though 6 plants and 8 ounces is considered to be the floor below which cannabis is presumed to be for medical use. Oregon and Washington allow possession of 1.5 pounds and over a dozen plants. Colorado allows for industrial-sized cultivation for its dispensaries. From all of these states, law enforcement claims growers divert plentiful, cheap Western medical marijuana to recreational marijuana consumers back east. So, since Arizona in 2010, medical marijuana laws that have passed maintain all production and distribution of medical marijuana in a tightly controlled, heavily surveilled dispensary system, whereby taxation, rule, and market forces, the prices of medical cannabis equal or sometimes exceed the prices on the local streets. The third way in which medical marijuana laws like Illinois are further restricting access is through the requirement of a bona fide relationship with the doctor. Now, this may sound obvious to the average person. Of course you have to have a physician-patient relationship. Until you understand how medical cannabis works in the real world. People who want to use medical cannabis fall into two camps, those who've been using it already and those who haven't. So for the current users, they have often been using cannabis in lieu of seeing a physician. But when they go to get legal, they can't without the signature of a doctor and in most states a pile of medical records documenting their qualifying condition. So some of them go to a regular doctor to get examinations to prove they have the condition they've been using marijuana to treat. Under some of these newest medical marijuana laws, however, a doctor-patient relationship isn't bona fide without fulfilling certain length of time requirements. And then for the non-users, many of them have been seeing a regular doctor for some time, so fulfilling the bona fide requirement isn't the problem. Their regular doctor is. Most physicians who'd like to recommend medical cannabis are prevented from doing so by their insurance, their contract with a hospital or the government, their clinic's policies, or merely the personal fear of being labeled a pot doc. So, in many medical marijuana states, patients gather their medical records from their regular doctor and take them to a specialty medical marijuana clinic where a pot doc will confirm the qualifying condition and sign the recommendation. That most certainly is not a bona fide doctor-patient relationship under the newest medical marijuana laws like Illinois. Meanwhile, in Latin America, the lower house in Uruguay's government just voted to legalize not just marijuana possession, but cultivation, selling, and buying marijuana. For healthy people! The upper house has more than enough support to pass it, and the president has vowed to sign legalization into law, despite the fact that a supermajority of Uruguay's citizens do not support marijuana legalization. Throughout Latin America, many countries have decriminalized not just the personal possession of marijuana, but of all drugs. In Mexico, the legislature just approved a law that allows the possession of up to 5 grams of marijuana. In Paraguay, it's 10 grams, and in Venezuela, it's 20 grams. Personal possession of marijuana is 20 grams in Venezuela. Anything over that is a felony in Florida. Argentina's Supreme Court and Ecuador's new constitution recognize the rights of citizens to use personal amounts of drugs. Now, I didn't know a whole lot about Latin American drug policy when I started looking into it, but in researching Latin America, what I didn't find was medical marijuana. These countries don't make exceptions to criminal prosecution for marijuana based on specific medical conditions. They simply refuse to prosecute their citizens for being addicts. The reason why a citizen uses marijuana is irrelevant so long as it is a personal amount and they aren't dealing. In America, we have strong majorities that support general medical use of cannabis and tiny majorities that favor outright marijuana legalization, yet our bravest lawmakers have to fight for increasingly restrictive medical bills. In Latin America, they don't even consider medical cannabis and have strong majorities that oppose outright legalization, yet their bravest lawmakers are passing decriminalization of all drugs and legalization of marijuana for all citizens because it is the right public policy. Now, that's most of the radical rant, but I wanted to take a little time here to take a look a little deeper into some of these Latin American laws. It's quite interesting what I found, and you can get this graph that I have made over at the National Cannabis Coalition. I'll switch screens here and see if we can't give you a look at this. for those of you watching on the webcams. This is a new graph that I've put together. Now, I've made the marijuana graph many times, but this is the Latin American graph. And where it is dark green, that's where it's going to be legal to possess and grow. Light green is legal to possess, where you're not punished if you have a personal amount. Bright green is the medical. The gold is decriminalized for addicts. And that means where if you have a personal amount, you're still punished in some way, like it's a fine or you have to go to rehab or something like that. But if you have a user amount, usually 5 grams or so, you are not punished. And then, of course, the red countries are going to be the ones that still have severe criminal penalties. Now, starting in the north of Latin America, Estados Unidos, that is United States, we've got medical use in Arizona and New Mexico, and we've got medical and decrim in California, and then we've got severe penalties in Texas, in Florida still. Moving on south, in Mexico, in 2009, April of 2009, Mexico's government approved a new law, the general health law, that decriminalized possession of up to 5 grams of marijuana. There are other user amounts of cocaine, meth, heroin that are allowed for addicts, codified into law. Cuba, Dominican Republic, most of Central America still retains it as a crime, except for Costa Rica. Costa Rica has decriminalized drugs for personal consumption. And again, those personal amounts usually set at the 5 gram level when it's talking about marijuana. As we get to the northern parts of South America, Venezuela in 1993 replaced prison sentences with social security measures for possession of up to 20 grams of cannabis. Up to 20 grams in Venezuela. Now, Colombia there in red to Venezuela's left still, of course, maintains severe penalties for all drugs. Ecuador is one of the countries where it's been made legal to possess. A new constitution that was approved by referendum in September of 2008 says the following about drug users. Under no circumstances shall their criminalization be permitted, nor their constitutional rights infringed upon. Wow. In Peru, just south, the law on drugs does not punish drug use or drug possession for personal use by imprisonment. There may be fines, rehabs available. South America's largest country, Brazil, in 2006 law introduced important changes in the country's drug legislation as it depenalized consumption and rejected incarceration for drug users, even in cases involving repeat offenses. Moving south, we find in Paraguay a new drug law in 1988 exempted from punishment those in possession of a maximum of 2 grams of cocaine or heroin and 10 grams of marijuana for personal consumption. And then nearby, the long coastal nation of Chile, we find the law does not prohibit personal and private consumption of any drug, although it does penalize consumption in groups. It does not establish a threshold for quantity, and the distinction between trafficking and consumption is left to the discretion of a judge. Imagine judges having discretion. Then further over on to the Atlantic coast, Argentina, in August of 2009, Argentina's Supreme Court declared in a landmark ruling that it is unconstitutional to prosecute citizens for having drugs for their personal use. No prosecution for personal use. And then, of course, the big story, Uruguay. Uruguay's lower house late Wednesday approved a sweeping bill to legalize marijuana. Under the bill, which could become law as early as this month, people would be allowed to grow marijuana in their homes, limited to 6 plants per household. They would also be permitted to form cooperatives, allowed to cultivate 99 plants. In addition, private companies could grow marijuana under the bill, though their harvest could be bought only by the government, which would market the drug in licensed pharmacies. And that is to keep them in line with international treaties. Hey, folks, that's all the time we got here. For Brian the Red, I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us. Stay tuned for the last Toker Talk Radio for at least the summer. And until next time, take care of each other, Tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
Take a seat, you you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you